Alright guys, so you know the deal. I'm not gonna waste too much time trying to talk. Let's just jump into our work. So we're going to go to our classroom, we're gonna click classwork, and then we are going to go to our literary devices packet. So hopefully over the last day you should have knocked out the entire first section. That is alliteration, allusion, analogy, characterization, conflict, connotation, denotation, and euphemism. Now, we covered the majority of those things over the last few days, but hopefully yesterday gave you a chance to get them all knocked out. If you have not yet done that, go ahead and watch yesterday's video so that you can fill in what you haven't done yet. And now let's move on to our second portion. We've got several definitions already. If we look, we have flashback is the use of a scene in a work of literature that took place prior to the main action of the book that's currently going on. So, like we said earlier, that's like in Harry Potter, where it looks at the start of the movie, it looks back to when Hagrid was bringing Harry Potter to the Dursleys' house after his parents were killed. That is a flashback, because the main action of that movie takes place when Harry is like a 12 or 13-year-old kid, basically living in the Dursleys' house under their, their stairwell. So foreshadowing is going to be the use of special language, extra attention, or hints to inform the reader about what might happen next. Hyperbole is the use of extreme exaggeration. We did all of this yesterday, so hopefully you guys have managed to work your way into these things. Imagery is going to be the use of descriptive words in order to create a mental image or scene. All of these things, if you need to see the definitions that we covered, go ahead and look at yesterday's packet. Or not yesterday's packet, but yesterday's video. We're going to cover a few more definitions right now, and then we're going to actually cover quite a bit of these activities later on in the packet. So an oxymoron. What is an oxymoron? Well, we're going to say an oxymoron is I'm having trouble spelling, is a contradictory statement. So a contradictory statement. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about the word contradictory. When something's contradictory, that means that it doesn't make sense because two things are opposite each other. Two things are opposed. They can't be blended together and make sense. So let's go to Google, the place where we search everything, and figure out some examples of oxymorons. So examples of oxymorons and serious fun. It's seriously funny. The reason why those would be looked at as oxymorons is because when something's funny, it's necessarily not serious. We don't find humor in serious things, but when we say seriously funny, we're saying that it's so funny, I'm dead serious about how funny it is. But when you look at those two things literally, they contradict. So other examples, let's find more examples. Jumbo shrimp. That's an excellent example. If we look here, jumbo shrimp is an oxymoron because it says jumbo, which is large, and shrimp, which is another word that we use for incredibly small. In this context, it means a very large shrimp, but even very large shrimp aren't very large. So it's an oxymoron. Bittersweet, like bittersweet chocolate bars, those two things are a great oxymoron because they're literally contradictory. You can't have something be both bitter and sweet. But when we combine them together as that oxymoron, we're basically saying that it's sweet, but not very sweet. I guess bittersweet sounds better than mildly sweet chocolate. But that's an oxymoron. It's something that is completely contradictory when taken literally. So let's actually change our definition. Say it's a contradictory statement when taken literally, but means something else. It means something else figuratively. Paradox. So what's a paradox? A paradox is going to be similar to an oxymoron, but not quite the same thing. A paradox is going to be something that is situationally not possible. But I don't like that definition. So again, let's do what every good student does and Google it. So let's look up a good definition of paradox. All right, what's a good definition of paradox? A tenet contrary to received opinion, a statement that is seemingly contradictory or opposed to common sense, and yet is perhaps true. A self-contradictory statement that at first seems true. I think both 2A and B make a lot of sense. We're going to take the definition of 2A and we're going to plug it into our work. So let's move all that stuff back. There we go. Boom. A statement that is seemingly contradictory or opposed to common sense and yet is perhaps true. I like that as a definition. Here's my best example of a paradox. And it's a thought experiment. It's kind of fun. So I want you to imagine a creature with blue horns, the body of a golden retriever, and the tail of a fish. Okay, you got that in your head? So this is the paradox. That creature only exists if you don't believe in it. And if you do believe in it, it does not exist. Do you guys see how that creates a paradox? Because the second you believe in it, it doesn't exist. But if you don't believe in it, then it exists. So what you end up with is this cycle of nonsense, essentially. And a paradox, again, is a statement that seems contradictory or opposed to common sense and yet is true. Now that's a thought experiment, but I bet we can find a better example. So let's go look at examples of paradox. And again, these will be in activities also, but deep down, you're really shallow. I don't really like that. That's not a very good example of a paradox. Paradox. Example. This statement is a lie. Okay, so this again is a good example of a paradox. If we think about it logically, if that statement is a lie, then it has to be true. But if that statement is true, then it has to be a lie. But if it's a lie, then it has to be true. So we end up with this crazy back and forth. It's contradictory in its own self. You see paradox in like science fiction when robots are taking over. Like maybe somebody will tell the robot that this statement is false, and then the problem that the robot has is it's trying to compute that statement, because if it's false, then it's true, and if it's true, then it's false, and it goes around and it loops and it loops and it loops, and then the robot's head explodes. That's a paradox. Yeah, it's kind of silly, but whatever. Personification, we've already covered this. Personification is the giving of human-like traits to inanimate objects or to non-human objects. So let's go ahead and write that as our definition. The giving of human-like, I feel like that's a hyphenated word, human-like traits to non-human objects. So these can be both inanimate, which means that they're not alive. So like calling, I don't know, saying that the bubble danced around the room. That is a human-like trait, dancing, and bubbles aren't alive. So that would count as personification, but it can also involve things that aren't just inanimate, but are rather just not human. So, for instance, when you say that your dog yelled at you, dogs don't yell at anyone. Your dog's not trying to make intelligent speech towards you when it barks at you. But when you say it yelled at you, you are personifying it. You're giving it a person-like quality, even though it's not inanimate, it's not human, so we can personify it. So plot structure. Plot structure is going to be the consistent layout of events in works of fiction. And then we'll do a little colon right there so that we can talk about those actual events. So in middle school, the way that we talk about plot structure is the first thing that happens being, anyone know? I don't know why I'm asking you this. You obviously can't answer me. So we start off with the exposition. And that includes things like characters and setting. It's the very start of a book, laying out how things are from the very beginning. It gives us a feeling of the way things were, because things don't stay that way. So the exposition, characters and settings, are characters and setting. And then we have what is called the initiating event. Some of your other teachers might call it something else. Some people call it the starting problem. I prefer the term initiating event. It's the thing that happens that makes the protagonist, or the hero, I guess, it's the thing that happens that makes their life exciting. The problem that comes up that changes their life from being an everyday, ordinary kind of thing to being something much more, fun to read. But it's the thing that starts the problem that they have to solve throughout the rest of the book. Following the initiating event, we have the series of rising action. And rising action is just a series of events that build up tension in the story. And from that point, we end up with the climax, which is the point of highest tension in the story. I call it the oh crap moment for the protagonist, because in action and adventure stories, which are what I prefer to read, it's the point where the protagonist is usually in the most peril. It is the point where we're uncertain what is going to happen to the fate of our protagonist. So for that reason, I call it the oh crap moment. In other genres of fiction, that might not work out so well, but just think of it as the point of highest tension, where things seem craziest, I suppose. Following the climax, we end up with a short, and I mean incredibly short most of the time, falling action, in which case things start to calm down, and that pretty quickly leads to the resolution, in which case everything's kind of wrapped up and tied together with a neat little bow. Now, I'll say this about those 2 points. The falling action is typically rather short in a work of fiction because it's an incredibly boring thing to read. Think about it this way. I'm trying to think of something that you guys might have read before. Maybe The Hunger Games. I don't know. But if you think about it, once Katniss wins the Hunger Games with Peeta, and she's not in danger anymore, it would be an incredibly boring book or an incredibly boring movie to just, watch them go back home and eat their food day in and day out, living around a house. It's just not exciting. So when we write a story, we don't write large falling actions. Another example might be the recent Avengers movies. Once they beat Thanos, there's really not much to say. unless they go on another adventure, in which case we're talking about a completely different story. So for that reason, Fallen Action is very short. And the resolution, when I say it's tied up in a neat little bow, I don't want you to get the impression that that doesn't mean it can't be bad. Sometimes the resolution is that a character dies, even if it's the character that you really care about. You know, maybe Iron Man gets killed, and that's the resolution. Who knows? Point of view. The point of view is going to be the. Well, actually, let's do it this way. Let's do first person, second person, and third person. So the point of view is going to be the way that the author is telling the story, the narrator's perspective, and it has to do with where they are in reference to the story. So for instance, a first person point of view uses pronouns like I, let me put like I, me, and myself. Second person, which is not something that you typically see stories written in, uses pronouns like you and yourself. And then third person, which is really a lot more common than the other two, uses pronouns like he, she, and etc. There's tons of third person pronouns that are used in point of view. But I want you to notice what this means for our narrator. So in a first person point of view story, the narrator is actually in the story, taking place in the action, or taking part in the action rather. So when we see stories written like this, it's interesting because that means that our narrator is typically the protagonist, or at least involved with the protagonist somehow. When we look at things like second person, that means that you are the protagonist. You are the one doing things. We don't typically see books written in this fashion because it's kind of jarring, because the whole time you're listening to the narrator describe what you are doing in the book, which is not great for suspending your disbelief. That is, it's very difficult to buy into the book when you hear that you're the one doing the action, because you might end up doing something that you wouldn't actually do in real life. You usually only see these in things like letters or in choose your own adventure books. You'll see second person. And then third person uses pronouns like he, she. These are where most books fall into, and I'm sure you've read tons of them. A pun. A pun is a play on words. We're gonna keep it simple like that, and when we get to the other parts of the activity for it, we'll elaborate on that. Theme. I'm gonna cover this in class because it can get a little weedy. So for the sake of not confusing you, we're gonna skip that for right now. And understatement, I think we will also cover in class. So let's go ahead and scroll down now that we have gotten all of that done. And let's look at some examples of things that we have and have not covered. So if I remember correctly, we got done with characterization, we finished conflict, and connotation and denotation I think we talked about. Euphemism we got to. Flashback, I think, was where we ended. So let's look at foreshadowing as an activity. So it says here, foreshadowing is a warning or indication of a future event. Read the scenarios on the binoculars, then beneath the story, foreshadow what might happen next in the story. So here, I'm going to go over story 1 with you guys, and I would like for you to please try to figure out story 2 for yourself. Decide what is going to happen in that event. So, story 1. It was a cool evening on the eve of Halloween. Sarah and Marie were prepping their costumes, designing their baskets for candy, and brainstorming pranks for tomorrow's antics. Suddenly, the phone rang, and an unknown voice on the other line said, "Don't hang up." Okay, so obviously, in order to figure out the foreshadowing, we need to have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in the events that we're reading. So let's take a quick assessment of the facts. Number 1, it's the eve of Halloween, so it's the day before Halloween. Sarah and Marie, two friends we would assume, are together and they're thinking about how their Halloween's gonna go. They are thinking about costumes, they're thinking about their baskets, and they're thinking about pranks to play. And then the final event is that the phone rings and a stranger, somebody that they do not know, says, "Don't hang up." Now, from this, there are many things that can happen. This isn't particularly specific foreshadowing, but I think we can draw some sorts of conclusions based on what's going on. So, first of all, it's a stranger on the line, and they don't greet them in a traditional, "Hello, my name is," insert name here. They say, "Don't hang up." That's a very weird way to address somebody on the phone when you're first talking. That's worth noting. Second, it's the eve of Halloween. We probably didn't get that information from the author for no reason. It didn't come out of nowhere. There's something mysterious about the holiday of Halloween. There's something scary about it. And having a stranger address you and say, "Don't hang up," can be certainly scary too. So between those two things, the possibilities of what could be foreshadowed become more narrowed. It's very unlikely that on the eve of Halloween, two young girls are going to get a call from a stranger that says, "Don't hang up." And then he's going to be like, "You just won a prize. Congratulations. Here's $1 million." That doesn't make a lot of sense. It's much, much more likely that this is a scary situation. So what happens next? That can be up to you, but we want to stay in the realm of possibilities. So it's Halloween, stranger calls, don't hang up, two young girls, what happens next? In my mind, this could be foreshadowing the start of a horror movie where he says something like, "Look outside the window," and they see somebody in a mask or something. Now that's creepy, but I think that is a possibility based on what's going on so far in story 1. So that's what I'm going to write. What happens next? The stranger tells the girls to look outside, and when they do, they see a man in a creepy bunny mask shining in the moonlight. Boom. Creepy situation, but I think it makes at least some sense. It's a possibility given the information that we just received. So for story 2, I want you guys to go ahead, read that, and try to determine for yourselves what you think is being foreshadowed. You're free to use this example in story 1, but I would encourage you to also think of your own thing. This is what I think is going to happen next. But what do you think is a possibility? All right, so moving on from there, we're going to talk about hyperbole. So hyperbole, again, it's an exaggerated statement or claims that are not meant to be taken literally. Now, I believe we covered this just a little bit together, but in case we did not, let's look at this. So directions: create hyperbole describing how much the backpack weighs. Write the hyperbole on the front of the bag, then draw the contents of the bag under the flap. So that means move that and add images to the backpack. I'm actually not concerned about you adding images. Don't worry about that. It's kind of a waste of time. So instead, let's go ahead and let's add a hyperbole to this. Now I want you to give me at least 3 hyperboles for how you can describe a backpack, and I'm going to give you one example myself. So obviously we can say that the backpack weighs a ton, but that's not very creative at all. So instead, I'm going to write my backpack weighs as much as a blue whale. I believe the blue whale is the largest animal still alive. I'm not positive, but my backpack weighs as much as a blue whale. So go ahead and come up with 3 total hyperboles for the weight of your backpack. Again, the reason that this is a hyperbole is because it's an exaggeration. My backpack does not actually weigh as much as a blue whale. It would kill me if it did. At least if it fell on me. All right, literary device imagery. So imagery is visually descriptive. Again, it doesn't always have to be visually. Or figurative language, especially in a literary work. Directions. In a paragraph format, use vivid descriptions or phrases to describe the picture to the left. Create the imagery for the reader. So, for the sake of not taking away from what you're able to say, I'm not going to describe that picture. Instead, I'm going to describe my background here. So you're going to want to do your own thing, but I'm going to talk about this. Write a descriptive scene in the box below, then partner up and see what your partner draws based on your description. So we're not going to be doing the drawing section because I'm not there today, but we will be doing this writing section. So I'm going to write based on my background. I kind of thought my background would be a little bit easier to write about, but we'll do this anyway. So what I see is a heron that kind of looks like it's on fire. So I'm going to say this. In the Arizona, I spelled Arizona with a lowercase. Shouldn't do that. In the Arizona brushland. I don't know if herons live in Arizona. They probably don't. Also, I spelled Arizona wrong. In the Arizona brushland, just as I was beginning to fall asleep, I looked out across the water to see the strangest sight. A heron, large and beautiful, with glowing eyes, appeared to catch fire in the setting sunlight. Reds and oranges reflected like small rubies on its otherwise white coat. All right, so let's talk about this. Why is this imagery? Well, through use of description, we have built a picture of this fiery heron. So let's look at the descriptive words that I've used here. So I talked about the water. I talked about the Arizona brushland. So if you have an idea of Arizona and what the brushlands look like, you would know what that looks like. You can imagine a water, a stream or something being there. And then I described the heron in more detail. Large and beautiful with glowing eyes. It appeared to catch fire, so we can imagine something glowing and on fire. in the setting sunlight. So now we have an image of the sun setting. And then I further describe what the heron catching fire looks like. The reds and oranges reflected like small rubies on its otherwise white coat. All of those words, especially color words I used a lot of here, are examples of imagery. So you're going to want to go ahead and write something about this scene right here. I don't think you'll have too great of a problem with that, but do take your time. Describe this scene that you have here in detail so that you're painting a picture with words. You should be able to delete this picture once you're done with this and have somebody vaguely imagine what's going on here. All right, literary devices, irony. So there's two types of irony that we're going to talk about. There's actually more than just two, but we're going to talk about two. And that's dramatic irony, which occurs when an audience knows something that a character doesn't. And then there's situational irony, which is the outcome of when you expect something and then something completely different happens. So, for instance, there's a movie that you guys may or may not have seen. It's called The Princess Bride, and it's a really cool movie. It's super funny. I would totally encourage you to watch it. But there's a situation in which the main character is in a contest of sorts with one of the bad guys. And the contest is this: I'm going to poison one of these two cups, and then you decide which one is poisoned, and I will drink whichever one you don't pick. Now, if the situation played out how we would expect, the hero would probably get to keep the cup that is safe, and then the villain would end up picking the wrong cup and dying. But situational irony happens there, in which case, or rather, because what actually happens is that our hero ends up poisoning both of the cups, because he's spent years developing an immunity to the poison. So again, the situational irony there is that our expectation is that one of the cups is poisoned, and the even the villain's expectations is that one of the cups is poisoned, but the actual case is such that both of the cups are poisoned and the villain still dies. The example they give here is laughing at a person who slips. What could make this situation ironic? Write an example of both dramatic and situational irony. So laughing at a person who slips, I would assume that the irony there is that they could be hurt. I don't know. I don't think that's a good example. But our directions say write an example of both dramatic and situational irony beneath the banana. What would be an ironic name for the largest dog of the show? So let's ignore the banana thing. I think we'll come back to the idea of irony later on, but let's have you do the bonus section. I want you to write a name that would be ironic, situationally ironic. That is something that would be different than what we would normally expect for the largest dog at a dog show. So for instance, it wouldn't be ironic to name the largest dog Tank, because tanks are huge. So go ahead and write down a name that you do believe is ironic for a large dog. Literary device, simile. So simile and metaphor, we've done these, but I want you. Actually, I think we've done that. So let's go ahead and skip that. Mood and tone, again, we're gonna cover this when I'm back in because it can get kind of in the weeds. So let's skip that. Onomatopoeia, I think we've covered, but if you haven't yet covered that, I want you to go ahead and write something underneath here, or underneath each of these, which gives an onomatopoeia sentence. So for instance, this word boing, you could say something like the spring boinged as it went down the stairs. It's a slinky, I guess. Do people still play with those? I don't know. They were kind of cool when I was a kid. like little kid, not like your age, but oxymoron. So again, an oxymoron occurs when opposite ideas are joined together to create an effect. Directions create an oxymoron for each of the scenarios to the left. So with this one, we have things like the living dead. Obviously, this is zombie, right? The living dead. I'm assuming you guys have all heard that before. But what makes it a oxymoron is that something can't be both alive and dead. So go ahead and write that down right there. And then we're going to be creating our own oxymorons together. So an oxymoron for something funny, we've actually already covered that in our example earlier, but let's go ahead and write that down. Seriously funny. And what makes that an oxymoron? Again, the fact that something can't be both serious and funny. So I want you guys to sit and try to think out some examples of oxymorons here. So something strong, something delicious, something, or I'm sorry, what's a deeper meaning? What's the deeper meaning of big baby? So here we actually have the oxymoron big baby, and you're simply going to explain what it means and why it's an oxymoron. And then here for awfully lucky, explain what it means and why it's an oxymoron. I'm actually going to give you an answer to something delicious too. This is my example, but you might have something different. So I think that an oxymoron for something delicious could be disgustingly tasty. Disgustingly tasty. It's so tasty, it's disgusting. All right. Sorry about that. Literary device. Paradox. This is going to be the last one I think that we're going to cover together. We might do one more. Who knows? Paradox. Contrary to expectations, existing belief, or perceived opinion. Example, love is blind. I want you to actually do this. I want you to talk to people around the room and go ahead. If they're working on something else, that's fine. Just have them give you an example. But try to come up with examples of paradox. Feel free to use Google and find some paradoxes. And obviously just type them in there. Personification. If you haven't already done this, go ahead and add personification for each of these things. So for instance, the UFO ran across the night sky. Okay, so the reason that this is personification is that UFOs don't run. That's a human thing. That's an animal thing. UFOs can't run, so that idea of running across the night sky is personification. What did the UFO actually do? It just flew across the night sky. There's another thing right here. You guys can read the directions and figure that out for yourselves. And then the last thing is we're going to do plot structure. And in this, you're going to talk about a couple of things, but you're going to read a short story. The short story I'm going to have posted in our classroom, and I want you to fill out the plot structure. Please tell me the exposition, that is the characters and setting at the start. Please tell me the rising action. Please tell me the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. You will be able to find this story in our classroom. I'll even label it plot structure story. And that's all you're going to be doing today. If you finish early, please take out a book and try not to be too loud for the substitute. All right, I will see you guys later. Again, sorry I couldn't be here today, but hopefully I've given you, enough stuff to keep you busy and learning. All right, bye.